Hello? Does this work? Hello? Who's this? Does it work? Everybody ready? Let me see. I can mute myself. Where's my time code? Turning is fine. Does it work? Madness income. Incoming. Yeah, it's fine. Incoming. Everybody prepare your brains. Prepare your brains. I drink and cough because I can't drink. Okay. Yes, it works. Deep breaths. Any questions? Any questions for our perspective? So what I kinda do in my brain um, is think about how to like I would like to make a guide, like an actual guide. It's not like a tutorial, but it's a um, it's like a educational counterforce to how perspective is usually talked about in books, because um, I'm smarter. I'm smarter than books, and books suck. So I gotta make a guide. That's, it's so weird. So I'm trying to find out where the difficulties are, right? Like what is the actual difficulty to make a drawing, right? That's the gist. You make a 2D drawing, but it has to, convey the 3D-ness. This is like, who said it? Noodle said it. Is it Noodles? Noob Doodles. Noodles, fine. What is it that I make look easy, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that would happen, and it includes just having a shape, right? It's like a weird looking shape. And this shape already exists in perspective, and it's like the weirdest concept. It's awkward because what we know about perspective is basically uh, my brain is just weird. So the first thing that comes out of my brain is a critical question, right? It's like I have the book, and the book is telling me you got to do it this way because reasons, right? Like perspective grids and stuff like this. And I'm asking, how do things like come to be within perspective? We talk about you have people say how to draw stuff in perspective, right? So as if there is a place where stuff is in perspective, and then there is a place where stuff is outside of perspective. And this is it's like, I can't rant, but it's confusing my brain to the point where it doesn't make sense, right? Like, answer the question, answer this, or if is there even an answer? How does stuff exist outside of a perspective? When it comes to drawing things in perspective, can I draw things outside of perspective? And I can probably repeat this like 50 times. It doesn't make more sense, right? So perspective basically being this thing about space, right? There is you, the observer, right? You see stuff. You see stuff in front of your eyes, right? And what I have learned is basically, let's say I want to build a PC, right? And it doesn't work, right? So my mom says, look at it from a different perspective. And it has nothing to do with drawing. Another question is, has anybody ever heard something like this? Right? Like looking at something from a different perspective. And it kind of implies a change of viewpoint. I think I was here for the last video talking about behind the camera stuff. Yes. Yes, I have this. One second. This one. Right? This being basically what we see. Right? We can see a house and a tree and there's a perspective grid. And it can basically always be one point. The car itself is not flat. So yes, I can have a car. I can have a car from the side. Right? It's a very, very awesome car. Brum brum, right? Brum brum. The car itself it has curves and it has lines, it has planes, but it's not flat. Like if I'm really, really, really precise, right? If I look at the car from the top, the side of the car is not like this, right? It's not completely straight and flat. So now the idea is basically, what if I look at a face from the side? So the face itself, basically it goes like this. It has lips and it has a chin, right? So the entire side of the face, like basically everything, is not flat, right? It's not like completely straight, flat. You can't even draw it because if the face side would be flat, this is what I see, right there. This is where basically my eyeball would sit. And it would bulge out because I know it's round, so it's not flat, but the side of the face is flat. It's like a fish. So weird. So there's my eyeball sitting on the flat side of my face, basically. It can't happen, right? It can't happen. See, the thing is, one dimension is still, well, technically you can argue, but there is a okay, here's the question. Let's say I have at least 2 dimensions. This is where so saying the perspective thing, right? Looking at something from a different perspective would imply that there is a dimensional space, right? So we can assume this being me, and I'm looking at the perspective of a flat plane, right? I have to look at something. If I then say look at this thing from a different perspective, that means I change my position and I look at it from this point, from a different angle, right? From a different point of view, right? Angle of observation is what I call this, right? Right? So this works, but it still implies that there is a either 2-dimensional space or a 3-dimensional space. And still, it's basically weird because you, me, us, we are looking at this plane. It is a line because we, as the viewer ourselves, we are looking at it from the side, right? This guy, also us, is looking at it from the front, so he would see something different. This guy would also see something different. So still, we ourselves, we still see it from the side, but there is the implication of something being different. Let's see. This is basically, how would this look? Okay, so the plane from the front is basically this. This is what we need, right? And perspective basically, or how I see things, right? It's always about the space in front of your eyeballs, right? Everything in front of you you can see, and we maybe we have a peripheral vision of, let's say, there is a focal point. If I just look at the screen, but I pay attention to what I can see to my left and to my right. It is almost 180 degrees, right? This is everything I can see. I can see the wallpaper next to me, and this is very awkward. I know in front of me is basically a table. I have my tablet, my keyboard, and my mouse, right? I can still see the window to my wall, to my side. And I'm angling this to make it, to give it more sense. Otherwise there is a vanishing point protruding to the distance. Right? Everything that goes away from me has to go smaller, basically. If it is very close to my face, it is usually very big, and this is a very odd kind of I call it phenomenon because I have no other words, right? Like it's like the center of perception, right, of my reality is my eyeball, right? If I can't see it, it may not even exist, right? So if I put it in front of my eye, it's very big, right? If I move it away from me, it shrinks to something very small, right? This is basically the depth, but it is part of the space. So if I have no space, basically no depth, and I see a box below my eye level horizon, right? I can say, okay, so I see the back point, right? I see the far point and I see the close point. And maybe I see this one, but I already have this one. So we have A and B and C. If I have no depth, right, it's basically isometric perspective. And this is point C, there's point A, and there's point B. This is not realistic, yet it is in perspective. And this is the confusion when it comes to basically draw something in perspective, or basically draw people or a car or people, person, boxes, something, stuff in perspective. There is a confusion between basically the position change of this one. The object in front of my face, right, can change. And this is basically changing the perspective of the box, right? And I can have this with zero depth. I can draw a box just like this one, A, B, C, D, where the line that is closer to me, right, line A, is as big as line C. Yet line C is further away from me as the observer, right? So line A is closer. And this is the one phenomenon of perspective distortion. So, to my experience, right, when people talk about perspective, they refer to distortion. That is the process of stuff being close, being bigger, going away, being smaller. And this box, like basically, like I have two lines, right? And it's already a plane. Because if I say this is in the back, then I have to have something in the front that has to be bigger so that I can show the depth of the space. And this object basically telling my brain that there is a point or a line or a curve being closer to me. Contextualize, please, because just saying, asking vision cone maybe doesn't really answer anything. So the point being is, if it is further away, it is smaller, right? So there's my small line, there's my big line. That is basically it. So between this plane and basically this plane, what is the difference? Because they are both in perspective. They both exist in the same space, in the same perspective. Okay, there's the issue. They do exist in different perspectives. But one of these planes has a different visual feature. which is not explained or dissected or analyzed or criticized or basically taken apart from perspective. Because both of these are in perspective. One of them shows something different. That is the confusion. Can you form a long question? What about distortion? And what about the vision cone? And yes, there is a correlation, but there is a missing element, which is the lens in our eyes. So the eyeball itself is a lens, right? It is a glass body. I call it glass. It can be something else, right? But the light that goes in does come out, right? Or logic, right? So the cameras, different cameras have different lenses, right? There's one lens. And then there's a different lens. It has more curvature. And then there's like these lenses. Call them fisheye, right? Where the distortion is basically so extreme that it really shows, but it doesn't really affect perspective. It affects distortion. So this is where I say perspective itself is the position change. It affects me being the viewer looking at stuff. And perspective change is this, right? The box can move around. It can go back and in front. It can be above me. It can be below me. This is perspective. So basically the space itself is unified, right? The perception of space. And how deep does it really go? And this again is the confusion, because we are within a defined space. And this is it. This is our space. And it is basically, it goes to infinity. So to maybe properly visualize this is space. But you can't see it, right? It's like the universe without stars. But it is just, it can be a plane, it can be a wall. And again, for me, this is depth. This is depth. So if I have no interpretation of depth, this is point A, and this is point C. Logically, what I'm having is basically this being me, this is point A, and I know point C is on my depth axis, right? It goes away from me. It doesn't get closer, but it goes away. And again, we have the issue with depth. Because where is it? Drawing in perspective applies to any drawing marks that are well used to tell the drawing in a distance and beautifully sort of thing. One is used to tell to draw in the way distance. Yes, it does. It does imply the space and the depth. This is what I understand, right? Like whenever you have drawings about the 3-point perspective, it's not about 3-point distortion, right? But it is about distortion. Because, again, we have the issue with depth interpretation. How do I make look like C is further away? But again, I have to have something big in front and I have to have something small in the back. Like the concept itself is fairly complex, right? And I can understand how easy it is to just say, okay, you have a point to which everything goes. So this is your vanishing point. So everything leads to this point. And the idea basically being when you have your grid, right? This is like the depth interpretation exists between, again, point A and point C. the idea, and this is what basically it eludes me. I have no idea where the confusion exists because I mean I can here's the field test, right? How does the space come into this grid? Because there is a visual phenomena, there is visual information contained. And I explained it earlier. How does it get in there? And it is visible, right? And I eventually, in my training, in my practice, in my going mad because books didn't help me, finally understood this has to be it, right? And it is a simple visual marker that implies something being close to you and something being far away. So the grid itself contains this, but it is not really taken apart from the rest. And the rest being basically, there is something, again, so this is us. Come on, gotta have some teeth. So we are looking at stuff like a sphere or a square, right? And the square or the sphere, the box, it can travel further away from me, from my eyeball. This is the first thing that happens, because if it is closer to you, it has to go bigger. Now look at the line. Look at how long it is, right? And how eventually how small it gets, right? And this is the plane. So what I really look at is the distortion, and it is contained in the grid because this is big, because it's closer to me, right? And as I go into the distance, all it really does is go smaller. This is all that happens. In reality, I can take a finger, hold it in front of my face, and it is very big because my eye is this big. My finger is this big, right? The light in our eye is captured through a very tiny hole. And this is technically all I can see. I can take a tiny thing as big and hold it in front of my eyeball, and it will be very huge. As if it is huge. But it is not really huge. Right? It's confusing. So there is a relative distance and a scale. So again, if the same box goes away, it has to go smaller. And eventually it will be so small that it's a point. This is like so in my practice and analysis, and not using books, so I had to use my own terminology, use my own labels, use my own kind of words to describe the process. And that too is taking things apart. So I take things apart from basically A being the position change. Where is the thing? Because the box above me shows me the bottom plane. The box below me shows me the top plane. The box that is to my left shows me the right plane. Maybe it's below me, so I see the top. And this is perspective. If it is to my side, I have to see what the geometry presents, because it is a form. It is a 3D form. Technically 1, 2, 3 planes, X, Y, Z axis. Therefore 3 planes, 1 per axis. Right? It's one kind of additional step where I go, okay, I have a box, and the box exists in perspective, and the box is 3D. So I take this apart, right? I dissect the components. One plane. There is a second plane. And I have 3 planes. And these together form the box in X and Y and Z axis. Right? Any of these things can exist above me, from the left, below me, to my right, etc. And this is the visual cone, the visual field. Like I was explaining earlier, we exist in a confined space because this is what we see with our eyes. And perspective exists like in front of me, right? The box. If the box is above me, I can see the bottom plane. And the thing is, again, I have to use distortion so that I can convey. Well, it's a faceful, it's a mouthful, because the space has a third dimension, and this is what we talked about earlier. If it is further away, it has to be smaller. So for visualization's sake, I will not make this line smaller. So we still have a box in perspective. No, not this one. See, isometrica. We call it a name. We have a name when the space has no no, I can't write. Thank you, dyslexia. Distortion. Distortion. That's what I apologize for my writing skills, dyslexia. So, no distortion, still perspective, right? Has the name of isometric. We understand this logic, right? So if the box is above me and I have no distortion, this is what I see. And it makes no sense, because for my brain, it is imperative, it is important, it is vital, it is mandatory. I cannot not draw flat space. And the logic is always big, is whatever is close to me is big, unless there is a relative scale. This is small in relation to this. This is big in relation to this. This is very small in relation to this. And this itself is confusing, so logically, if it is away, further away, it has to be smaller. And there we go. It's like a 2-point box, 2-point perspective. And it's already confusing. 2-point perspective plus distortion, right? Without a grid. All I do is I understand the interpretation of depth, right? It's like, this is like, I have to admit, right? I've not done any sort of research, and there's no motivation to read books about perspective when I know that I already know the stuff, right? But for the sake of me being able to say my Coca-Cola is better than your Pepsi, I should maybe read into this so I know what the books talk about and don't talk about. But ultimately, from my peers and all the people that watch me and all the people that ever addressed or ever uttered any kind of issues with perspective, I realize that the confusion is basically depth interpretation. And it is a weird thing, because again, we have relative size, and I can say, okay, this is a skateboard. It is a piece of paper. It can be anything. There is a relative scale on how much I can distort to make things look or less coherent. And coherent basically means the space that I exist in, our space, our realistic space, is confined. Its distortion is limited. It has a certain amount of distortion depending on how far you go away, right? So logic being is that all I really do is I make this small, right? I make this big and I have a box. The second step is then, do I have a wall? Again, no distortion equals parallel lines. If I have distortion, these lines collapse. This is what we know. Lines converge towards the vanishing point. Why do they do this? What if I don't do this? What if I have my lines like this? And again, we have depth interpretation. And I am implying I have to remind myself that I exist in a 3D space. Right? Logic says if it is further away from me, it has to be smaller. Right? A and B line are just fine. Line A is the same size, so there is a nominal wall. This is what I call a wall because it goes straight up. like the wall that I can see behind my screen, wallpaper, right? It goes straight up into space. If it doesn't do this, it does something else, meaning it can lean forward, meaning the line goes bigger because it's closer to me, equals longer line, right? Logical consequence, if I build this into a plane, these lines, basically these edges collapse. And this does something else, because what this does is if I elongate these lines towards infinity, yada, 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 they will meet and I have a vanishing point naturally created. Naturally. This is the idea. I'm basically having a plane and I'm folding it into space by choice. There's like raw gravitas, you know, gotta have some weird alerts and sounds to keep people to keep the memory in people's brains. Like this is such a irrefutable, evidently something factual thing, right? It shouldn't ever confuse people because it's in the grid, right? It's like I'm going mad. So gotta make my voice more angry. So in the perspective grid, it is contained because this is big and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually it's a point. What is the vanishing point? What is the vanishing point and how is it created? It's another thing with the confusion because it is naturally created. So unless you need a thing in the space to see the space. This is why you create the grid. The grid reveals the space. This is the space. It's deep, but you can't see it. So what do you need? What do you need to visualize the space? So the vanishing point is basically a logical consequence of my object. My object being, it's not a teapot, so let's go with the plane, because it's simple. This is a plane. So technically, I can have another plane, and basically I can have an infinite amount of planes in the same space. It's where lines converge. So let's say I have a cup. What relevance does this vanishing point have for this cup? Where are the lines for the cup converging to the point? Let's assume I draw a perspective grid. It's like a quiz. It's like the most mean quiz you can ever have imagined. It's like me guiding you on the very thin ice, and I know you're gonna fall in, but I'm there to get you out. So there is no relation. Where's the relation to the point and this point and the cup or the planes? Because the lines, they don't, like if I have this plane, right, and I have this point, and I have these lines, and why don't they go there and converge? Like there is a maybe we call it common knowledge, but there is a assumption. There is the assumption that we know and we understand when we actually don't. And then when somebody asks the question, nobody knows the answer because nobody really answered the question before, because everybody assumed, oh, this is the way. Oh, this is the way. I don't know why, but let's go with this, right? And again, it's the same thing with the perspective grid. The perspective grid, again, it contains all the necessary information. But they are not dissected, not visualized, not seen. Yes, they are visualized. The lines of my plane, the lines of my objects, wherever they go, if my plane is infinitely long, right? If my teacup is infinitely long, where do they go? But this is the weirdness, right? So for these planes, every plane would converge independently. Logically. Like this is a choice I make. Because when I have a grid, and this is the flaw of the grids, when I have a grid and I have my cityscape and my skylines and my people and my cars and my sidewalks and all this stuff. But what if I have a couch that is angled? Holy shit, right? It's like you have a room, and let's assume this is the vanishing point that you can see. This is you, and this is the vanishing point, right? It's the assumption. You have a couch, you have a rug, you have a table, you have more couches, you have desks and stuff. This is all aligned, right? It all follows the grid. So what if you have something angled this way? What if you have something angled this way? What if stuff goes anywhere, but it is not aligned with your grid? It's already major confusion, besides the point that this is further away, thus it's smaller. If I want to continue this, it has to show that this is bigger and this is smaller because it's further away. And that means I end up naturally in a 3-point perspective space because I have 1 and 2 and 3 planes, and each of these planes has the independent vanishing point. Oh dear. And then stuff is not aligned to my grid. So let's say I have the rug at an angle, and I have my couch at a different angle, and I have a different couch at a different angle. So the lines, wherever they go, there's the vanishing point. It's madness. Can anything exist in that perspective outside the sphere defined by 4 points? Interesting tangent, and I would have to. Are you able to calculate this space? This is the fantastic assumption. So between our eye and the lens in our eye and fish eye, right? We have a space. And this is a spatial plane, spatial plane. If it is distorted, and this is again, it follows. Basically, look at fisheye lenses. Look at any GoPros. They have a certain amount of distortion. If the distortion is applied to a flat plane, it will warp, right? It warps. And this, if you follow the space, it creates a round space that is a sphere. It has a center point from which basically everything converges. Basically everything emits. So when I do this, I have a small ring and I have a bigger ring, and it grows, right, on its axis plane, right? So what this also does, it presents me with a perspective grid, and it is a logic that I have something big, and it goes actually bigger the closer I get to myself. So the further I go away from myself into the space, the smaller it gets. Right? So technically, 5-point perspective space is. So I gotta go with the box. Right? The box has 3 planes, and it can therefore have 3 vanishing points. This is 1. This is 2. And 1 goes down. Right? This is 3 for one object. right? 5-point perspective space basically means I have another space or another plane that has a different vanishing point. So I have 4. If then I have another plane, again, not aligned with my original box, I have 5 points. But this is not what you mean. The thing is, you can always project 1-point perspective, and this is the issue, right? I can have a normal box in 3-point perspective. I can always say that there is a point and everything converges to this point. This is the issue. So let me quickly go back, find something. So here's the example. These things exist in a 3-quarter perspective. The vanishing point logically follows this. This is a vanishing point for this plane. If the plane continues to infinity, it will converge and collapse into a point. It does not go to infinity, so it stops it there. Basically this location. So this goes down into space. This is big. I want to go into space, so I have to go smaller, 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 smaller. Again, I can do this. I can have 3 points plus easy, right? The thing is now, what I can do is basically project a 1-point perspective space onto this and say this is my new vanishing point, because for me as the viewer, everything can always go away from my brain, right? Everything goes away from my eyeballs. I can have another perspective projection and say there is a plane and it has a different vanishing point. I can have this arm basically lead forward. There is a different vanishing point. I can have this arm reach over, and this is small, this is big, because this is right closer to me is logic, right? So there's another vanishing point. I have one vanishing point per object, right? It should be, is it Y, is it J? Can I make this? Yes, object. So this is the weirdness, right? So what you see people ultimately try is they squeeze everything, if possible, into a 3-point space, right? So in my brain, space is dynamic, and it doesn't confine to 1 or 2 or 3 spaces or points or planes or anything. Because if I have more objects in my space, like a rug and a table and stuff and sofas and couches and windows, they all can go wherever they want. So let's assume you have basically half a circle. There is a middle point, and you shoot all of these things away from this. So logically, you would say, oh, everything converges, right? And that you actually don't have a round space, but you have a grid space, right? So usually everything aligns with the grid, but it shouldn't, right? It can go this way, can go this way, can go this way, this way, this way. Out of my zoom, holy potato. So if I have one vanishing point, all of these planes would converge to the same point. If the planes don't align with the grid, logically, consequently, however you want to call it, they have a new vanishing point. And so ultimately, if you have a desk and you have pieces of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, yada, 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 you have a million. You have a million vanishing points. So if I have a plane and a box in this way, I have a vanishing point that goes this way. If I have a plane at an angle, it goes this way. But the plane has 2, so it also goes this way, right? And for the other plane, it goes this way. So if I have another plane, the vanishing point goes this way. Like, is this in any way logical, or am I talking out of my ass? Because this is 100% logical in my brain, right? Like there's no real question mark, because it's basically what I can observe in front of my face in reality. I can have infinite amount of deep space. What I need is a plane, right? This plane is at a specific angle because the lines are first parallel and they don't change size. That means the plane is in a frontal, very much flat perspective. This is me and this is the plane, and I see it completely straight on. So the assumption being this plane is above me, but it still has the angle so that I see it flat, right? So technically there is no real depth or distance change between the 2 points. If I would angle the plane straight, right, something would happen, because this point is closer to me than this point. And this is something I have to visualize. Need more drink. Talking too much. 1 second. Yes, that is a good summary. Every plane has their own vanishing point. Technically, every plane has 2, because every plane has 2 dimensions, and that is x and that is y. So when you do have a plane, it's easy if you do it this way, right? If you say, okay, this is 1 point perspective box, and then basically you angle down this way, and you have 2 point perspective box. What if you have this box at a 45-degree angle? Point B, line B, is further away than line A, so it has to be smaller, right? I cut it, I connect, and I have a logical vanishing point created because I made this smaller, I put it into space. This would also go smaller, and I connect this, and it has a different vanishing point. Basically the same, right? They flow along the same space, right? It's basically the extension of this, but being rotated 90 degrees, right? Again, if I go down into space, eventually it has to go smaller. And this is the weirdness, because there's my parallel lines, not this one. It's like a weird construction, right? At some point I understood that it goes back and it has to go smaller. So I'm sitting there saying, okay, this is small and this is big, and there's my plane. And from this one, I knew I could draw 1 point perspective planes. If I make this basically times 3, I have a box. It is 1 plane, but in different axes. It is the same principle, right? Understanding how to calculate how big and small these are and how big and small these have to be, etc., etc. It can get into madness, and it makes it very easy to just have a set confined space. You draw your grid and you're happy, right? But this is a limitation. It is I could probably write an entire essay about how limiting I would feel by using grids, because the grid says this is it, right? This is 1 position and this is all positions you can have for this grid. In my brain, I have all of these as a possibility, because these are my 360 degrees. And 360 degrees basically in perspective, easily visualized, is a clock. I know I have a 12, I have a 6, I have a 9, I have a 3, right? And the idea is, instead of having a flat space and doing this horizontal and vertical, I have this at an angle, right? And this implies a 3/4 position. I can always project my 1 point perspective space and be done with this, right? But I don't want it to go this way, linear, right? I want it to be dynamic. And this is where I have this layer and this layer. Everything this way converges this way. And everything goes the other way, converges the other way. This is from basically a normal 2-point perspective space. If not 3-point, I can't have 3 points if I don't have 3 planes, right? So logically, if I go into space, all I really have to do is make this one, the line itself, smaller, right? Then I connect. It's all there is. It's all there is. The other part is, again, position change. If the box is above you, if the box is to your left, if the box is to your right. And still, the entire thing with the space is extremely weird because reasons. Like actually understanding how to create a confined space, right? Like set and fixed and proper, so that basically you can create the stuff but still play around with making it look like it's coming closer to the camera. Otherwise it just goes bigger. And this is the difference, right? So the hand, this hand, is big. Is it big because it's big, or is it big because it's closer to the camera? Even the other hand, is it big because it's close, or is it big because it's big? And that too is a weird difference, because the visual not phenomenon, the visual markers are basically the same. And still, if I think about like having one person standing in a fixed and set space, there is a lot of computational calculation in my brain that I have to pay attention to keep it all correct. Any questions? So limiting, it seems to be a logical consequence, right? When you just feed on the box and don't really critical think, and I had a need to ask all these questions. It's like the source of my madness. Really. I know the stuff, right? Because I wanted to know the stuff. I didn't just feed on perspective grids and was like, oh yeah, that works. It's fine. I can do what I want to do because I couldn't do what I want to do. And that was, ultimately, it was very frustrating. And the only consequence is really sit down, long, hard hours and think about what is space and how does the perspective actually get into my drawing, and what is perspective, what are vanishing points, and how does it all work, and in not just one thing that you can call a grid where there is a point and everything is set and fixed, but in a very dynamic sense. That too is a complete madness. Like in my brain, I contemplate basically I have one state, and one state of anything has variations. And so from one state, I basically, it is one line. One line can have 3 states into space. It can go sideways, it can go back into space, it can go forward into space. So the line itself doesn't really show anything. It doesn't show where it goes, it doesn't show does it go back into space, what is bigger, what is smaller, what is the alignment, what is the elevation, what is direction, orientation, etc., etc. Deep breaths. So something has to happen for my brain to recognize this as a thing in space. And space implying 3D-ness. And 3D-ness implies perspective. Perspective being the position, right? My position in terms of relative to the weird line or this error in relation to me as the viewer. So I have a top plane. This is the immediate thing I identify. I see the box, and the default box that I draw is from the top. And it is a 3D box. in perspective, right? It is a 3-point perspective box. What you would expect to see is basically the distortion, right? Distortion to make it really look like I'm messing this up. Where's my small? Okay, this is already messed up. Where's my small? It's completely messed up. So where's the perspective and the distortion, right? So you have we have a kind of expectation of how it should look, right? I can draw a very normal box and say this is a box in perspective. Any box is in perspective. It's the square is in perspective. It's in 3-point perspective, mind you. You don't see it, but it's there. Kappa. Any questions? So again, interpretation is basically where am I and what is my object doing? And when I contemplate what is my object doing, again, I think about a radius or some kind of orientation, like a clock handle. Because my object, in terms of me being in front of my object, or basically behind my object can point to the left, to the right, to the front, to the left, to the right, to the front, to the right. It can go anywhere. And this is basically me taking my arm and saying, I'm pointing this way. Right? So what I'm trying is basically I'm pulling my arm into the space that I'm existing in. But it doesn't really show. What you expect to see is basically the form. And there it goes. There it goes into space. Do you see? Do you see? Do you see? I'm pointing this way. But I have another arm. And it points this way. So where is my vanishing point? Points. Point. Infinite points. I have no books to recommend now. This is like if you wanna learn anatomy, it doesn't really matter what book you choose. It's a style choice. Like I do say Loomis sucks, right? I don't like Loomis because his drawings are flat. That is my argument, right? This is Loomis, right? This is Loomis, and it's fine for Loomis. It's not fine for me, right? So I would recommend different books for different purposes, but I don't read books for art, so I can't really recommend stuff that I've not read. But for anatomy, it doesn't really matter as long as you learn the anatomy. Everything else is a style choice. If Loomis works fine because it looks fine, or it looks fine so it works, I used Hogarth, Borner Hogarth. And his illustrations are very volumetric, and there is a specific purpose to his illustrations, to reveal the volume and show the mass and the volume. This is not something Loomis does, right? Where Hogarth experiments with form and space, Loomis does not. Yes, my art book is filled, multiple filled to the moon. Yeah, I'm going insane. I should just shut up. My brain, send help. Yes. I should hit 10k layers. I mean, I'm well beyond 10k layers if I take into account all the other document series that I had. Very soon. Very, very soon. I need more drink. Actually running out of tea. I suppose there is a bias. There is a bias when I think about um, common education stuff. I suppose like tutorials and guides and this kind of stuff. So when the beginner is looking for guidance, I'm assuming she would look for very specific guidance. Like you said, what is the best thing to do to get better at art, right? Like it's basically I can say what everybody else says, practice, right? It's like regurgitate stuff I heard without really going into it. It's just so the point being is there is something very specific people have problems with, right? Like perspective or anatomy or form, right? Yeah, it's like saying draw more. It's pointless, right? What I would say is analyze, critical think, criticize, ask questions, right? It's like something very normal for me seems outlandish for somebody else. And this is where I'm a ruthless critical thinker. I take stuff apart. Like I'm even in my own brain, right? When I think something, I can ask myself, why do I think this? And this is already very normal for people. Like we all think. But usually not everybody thinks about stuff they think or do or say or like internalize or process internally. And when it comes to drawing, this is where I had to dig very deep into my own perception and brain, right? Like the amounts of frustration that I had to endure to just understand how to perspective a single plane, right? Like it can fill a book. It's a small book, but it can still fill a book. Like it's basically the line itself has a direction lead, right? It's like on a circle, 360 degrees. My line exists in a very specific orientation. It exists within 3D space by default, right? It's like in my brain, I have a construct of points that signal this is 3D space. This is not something I draw. Then I have a vector. My vector, my point, my line is very specifically orientated, directed, and aligned, right? And from this line, I have line space, which is a completely very odd kind of concept. So within the line space, right, if I have the line in the line space, it is following a specific direction. This, right? This line right now is moving outside the line space. So the line space basically being a kind of encapsulating square, right? And this is just to tell basically tells my brain that this line itself is set on a direction. So it can move this way, but it can also move this way. And it can move this way, it can move this way, it can go anywhere. Very odd is when the line goes its own directional axis. This is the oddity. And I even have to pay attention to this. So to create the plane in perspective, I have to draw a line in a specific orientation, then move a second line along a very specific orientation. And understand, am I in the line space? Am I not in the line space? And from this point, I can basically simply connect these endpoints and have a plane already that's just, it's a plane, right? So from this, I can take this line and move it in a specific direction to create the secondary plane and the third plane. And all I really do is connect. And I have a 3D plane in perspective, huzzah, without grids, without anything. How does this work, right? Especially, all I really do is copy, right? Right. So 1 and 2 and 3, right? 1 and 2 and 3. And there's 1, and there's 2, and there's 3. Oh no, it's a box in perspective in 3D. So if I take the line again and I move it in a different line, or basically different direction, and I still copy it, and again I can move it. This is where I pay attention to what angle the box is supposed to be, or basically the plane, including angles between the planes, because I want to create a box. So the box has to have these weird 90-degree angles, right? So the square itself, 90-degree angle, right? This is what we know. It's there, it's there, it's there. In perspective, now watch, these are not 90-degree angles, but it is a square plane in perspective. So again, we have very odd shapes that still work fine. What is this? Right? So in my brain, I have to identify what is the actual 3D space from this. And this is a very particular odd shape because it is skewed to the point where it makes it kind of difficult to see that it is still part of the plane. And this is like just one layer, but this is stuff I wanted to know. I wanted to find out how this works, because relying on this, drawing a grid, holy poop. I don't want to do this, right? I don't want to do this. Not like it seems to be a weird kind of thing to say, draw a grid to draw another grid, which is ultimately the 2-point box. Why would I draw a perspective grid to understand how to do a box? Like, the box itself is a grid. The grid itself is a box. There is a grid. And there we go. We are getting to the hatching. I draw a grid every time I hatch. And it's not something anybody would contemplate, but there is a grid. Right? And there is a grid. But it's not really a grid because these lines, they only go one way, so you would expect the grid to be complete, but it's not, and yet there's something contained between this line and this line because they converge. Eventually, there's a vanishing point. And I know this, right? When I do this one and this one, it's the same thing. They eventually converge. They build a plane. All of them do. So technically, I can have, say, this is my plane, and it should actually eventually has to have a convergence point. So when I draw my grids, I do contemplate and I pay attention to where does the plane go. Otherwise, it couldn't work. Because the form being round and there's different planes, and it kind of all comes together. Like it's the same thing. There is a point, right? It's a grid. There is a square. The square is part of a box. This one goes down into space. This one should go up into space, right? If I go up furthermore, I eventually can't see the top anymore, and all I see is the nothing, right? If there is a plane above this box, I would see its bottom plane. And this again is perspective. So if I go down, 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 and I follow my things, eventually, of course, I see the top and I don't see the bottom anymore, right? Because I can't see what's below. But if there is something below, I will see the top. And if I really want to go into space, all I really have to do is say, this is big, and then something has to happen. It goes smaller until it converges, where it's just a point. So what you would expect is this should also follow and be small. There's a plane, there's a plane. And then this one goes down. There's more. Small, small, small. See, eventually it may look weird, but again, this is where I ask the question. Why does it not look like it is coherent set in my fixed perspective, visual cone, field space, point of view stuff, right? This is where grids help, because grids define and make it set and fix it. There is no rattling the cage and moving around. It is set, fixed, linear. My space is dynamic because I go from this to say, okay, let's say, can I bend the space? And all I really gotta do is say, I see this plane. If the object moves through my visual field from this point to the other, I have to see the other plane. So this is what I call flip-flop, because there is a barrier between me seeing this plane to me moving the object to where the object is in front of me and I don't see the plane. And then I move the object further and I have to have the plane on the other side. And I can observe this, right? In reality, take a box, take a thing, move it from your left to your right, and observe what happens in between. This is all I do, right? I observe what happens in between. And right now, this was wrong. What happened? Just, there we go. So these are lines, right? But they show the visualization and the transition between one point of visual field, set or fixed or dynamic, to the other, right? From the left to the right. There's a plane, part of the line. There's another plane. Maybe it's a triangle. Maybe it's something else, but it is a plane that can be part of a box or something 3D. And again, if I keep this up, I eventually have a plane that is just a line because I can't see it. But the one thing, I see it to my side and I see it to my other side. And this again is the transition between left and right side of your face. You are in between. You have to be in between. And this again, hold a box to your left, right in front of your face, and one to your right, and it is the visual field. It is this, right? But it is not set and fixed because you can say the box goes forward, and then it goes this way. And eventually you'll lead to curved linear perspective. This is, I need more drink. I talk too much. My mouth dry. 1 second. I drink, then I talk more. You can carve some space. I need tea. Send help. 1 second. Default space. This is easy, right? This is easy. Normal plane, normal 1 point perspective. And the perspective being there's the lines that go to the vanishing point in case you missed it, right? This is a wall, right? If I don't do this wall, I do a 1 point perspective plane. All I do is make this smaller than this one, right? The vanishing point goes down, right? There's the vanishing point. So this is normal, right? It is a box. The box itself is in line and aligned with the grid. Grid space basically is just like you can have all these lines going through and you have these ones, right? So what I would do is basically tilt the first plane 45 degrees. So what this does is basically these two leading lines by default leading to the main vanishing point. I don't have those anymore, but I can pretend that there is one, right? There is my plane. This is big, this is small, and there's my my normal 1 point plane default box. So I have a box in a box, a plane in a plane. This is the idea, right? I tilt my default space 45 degrees because it makes it easier to curve linear, basically. So I have one side to my right and one to my left. Me being in the middle looking at this thing, being what is going on, right? So what I would do, I need more drink, holy boom, 1 second. Pressing wrong buttons. I will illustrate a concept. This is basically isometric space because it is infinite. infinitely long and deep. It has no distortion and no visual field change. This means we move with the box. What usually happens, you can have a box in front of you and in your face. It can be above and below. This would prompt perspective change. You see the box from above, you see the box from below. Keep this in mind, very important, positional change. This does not happen when I do this, right? I can stack the boxes to infinity, and I will always see the top plane like I see it. We move with the box to infinity, basically. We can go to the left, we can go to the right, wherever it goes, we see it just the same. No perspective change. We have position change, right? Seemingly. We can pretend there is a left and up and down and depth, but there is not, right? This has no distortion, right? Wherever you are, it's the same size. Wherever you go, it's the same size. Same size. Same size. Same size. So, if we go basically this way into space, right, aligned with the main plane, it's still the same size. So, what should happen, and this is where I contemplate basically the dynamic space, right? And instead of having dynamic space linear, I can basically say my objects are straight, but then my objects are bent or rotated, and thus creating the illusion of bent form or bent space. It is basically the same idea. Because as I have a portion of space, I have a portion of form. And as I have a boxy of space, I have a boxy of form. This being XYZ. Every plane has their own individual angle. Every axis has their own individual plane. This is basically the same box, right? This is the same box, but it is individual in its components, where one plane is still a box, but it has no planes. Meaning, even though it can be a shape, right? I always pretend there is a 3D space and plane. And that means if it goes down, something has to happen. If it goes up, something has to happen. So if it goes left, if it goes right, something has to happen. And I keep in mind that there is something like infinity space, where there is nothing happening in terms of distortion. So if I go forward, it has to go bigger. If I go back, it has to go smaller. If I go down in space and further away, it still has to shrink, right? So depending on where I go, and I'm aligning each box with the next box, do I go forward? Technically, yes, because I am changing position gradually. So something logically has to happen. So this thing goes bigger. And it seemingly looks like it is tilting, as if it is warping down. And this is like, it's so weird to ultimately control this, because somewhere in the change of my angle, it's drawing these weird looking squares. What is happening? And this again, I'm not seeing this in a 2D context. I'm seeing this in a 3D context, where my space is not a flat plane, but it is warped in both axes, right? And as you can see, if I keep this up, I eventually have a weird kind of space in between basically this is, again, I have a grid that even shows me the different curvature, right? From one to the next to the next. And this again is the transition. So something you would expect is basically there is a thing where it has to go forward. Like visually, not just go down and curve down where it goes smaller, but actually forward, where we would have a potato and the potato has a skirt, and the skirt is of a certain length, and the certain length can extend towards infinity. It's very much like a dancer, right? It's like dancing people. So this is very tricky because the information eventually overlaps with the curvature. that goes down. So again, between these lines, there is a very specific angle between the surface lines of the curvature. And all I gotta do is fake it in the brain, right? So this is the space, right? And I had the form going down before. And instead of choosing this angle, I look at this angle. And technically the skirt would go all the way around. And again, I'm implying the perspective, right? Instead of going this way, right? You see the difference when you look at the other part, because this is a flat skirt, and then it shoots up. So in my brain, I have a plane that is round and goes up and goes down, but it is flat. And the flat part is basically there are planes standing every part of the way away from the box. And this again is hatching. I have so many lines that they go all the way around, and every step of the way between the lines I have a plane, and the plane is part of a box, and the box is part of the space. And again, here comes the weirdness, because between this angle I can go linear, keep this angle the same, but I won't. So I change it, and I change it ever so slightly until I end up with a flip-flop, because I see this plane and then I don't see it anymore, but it comes back on the other side, and then it basically grows in prominence as the angle is going more and more away from its base. And the base was this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and then it changes ever so slightly to show the transition through your visual field. But it is the same as if you had a form, ring, skirt, sausage, banana, bending and warping. The difference being that this should be round. Round it goes. Right? So again, the curve has to change as it travels through the space. And that again is the same transition. So now we have this one. And we have the same thing, angles. Right? If I want to go down, I got to make this smaller. If I want to make this really tiny, I can pretend there is a vanishing point. Is all I really do. Right? All I really do is make this small. I build another plane, there is a box. This works. If I then contemplate this being my coherent fixed set space, it doesn't work. This is the illusion. This is the illusion. I'm not trying to create a confined space. If I were to do this, I have to calculate the space properly. And that means everything that is to the left is to the right. So I would have to basically copy and measure the distances between the boxes, how forward they are, how sideways they are, and then understand how to properly plot out the same stuff in the other side of the space. This is not what I want to do, because I want to build a space that is more dynamic. And this is where I go from seeing the top plane to basically not seeing the top plane, so that I can build another transition. Transition being from your left or your right to the other side, from the bottom to the top. And this is the idea. See? Top plane. Top. Top, 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 top. We have no change. Now we go back. Top, 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 top. Top. No top. But we have the bottom. And this is the change where we as the viewer have a box above us and below us, and we are in the middle, standing on another box. And between this angle and this angle, it's so easy. I have another plane that sets in motion. It's just another transition, because this is the same thing as this. And this is curvilinear. It's like all you really do is you play around with the space that exists in front of your eyes, right? We see it this way, and all we got to do is draw it the other way. This is the entire logic, right? Okay, this ugly box, but we see the bottom. no bottom, no top for the box in the middle. And then we see it. We see the left side. We see the right side. Because between we have the transition. So this is one transition, the transition to my hashing, because between this one and this one and this one, right, I have angles very much indicative to looking inside a box where there is a one-point perspective stuff going on, but it shows the transition. This is all I look for, right? Because then I have a plane in between, and all I got to do is hatch, and I see the transition. Between every line, I have a plane, and there's a box. There's another box. And then I have this one, but it goes the other way because logic, right? There's the sideline. And then I have this one. It's in between. There is boxes and boxes, but I can see in between because logic, right? And still I can keep this up linear, I can curve this around, I can move up in space, and this again is the weirdness, because I have to figure out how this doesn't work if you think about grids and points, right? All I think about is what is one to the next, and I have one to the next. There's no change, so I have to have something happen to make it look right, right? So again, going back to the initial thing. So there's my box, and I want the box to turn. So how do I make this look like the box is actually turning? But I have to do a flip-flop, right? Or kinda make it look like something is happening that is actually not happening. This is weird. So I'm tilting the box to one side. So you see both planes. This is normal. You can see this, right? And then I suddenly go away and I see the top where I wasn't seeing a top before. Again, from every line I can draw a plane, from every plane I can draw a box. Between the one box and the next box I have a transition. The transition needs to be visualized, if possible. Any questions? When there's no top and bottom, the middle line should be longer. When there's no top and bottom. What are you distorting? So technically yes, but this is very difficult because when you just have a plane and you are in the middle of the plane, like we know that these points are closer to you and your eyes than these points and these points and these points and these points. Logically, this would have to mean that every straight line would curve when you get close, right? So when you get really close to the line wouldn't be this, right? Because like overall the surface still has to warp, right? Depending on your location. And this is very difficult. And this is usually not something I use because it goes way too far. But otherwise you have the same idea happening for form. Gotta find my grid. Where go? I had it somewhere. There it goes, right? It's the same principle. Like the lines and the curves make it look like it's warped. Like there's actually a volume change. Where's my angle? Like you can identify that this is not a flat structure. This is the idea. So when you're able to give it curvature, right? When you manage to give curvature to your form, right? You can contemplate to give curvature to your space, right? This is basically the idea, but space is curved ultimately. ultimately space is not linear. Space is definitely curved. It's just the dependence of basically our lens and our eye. But so still, our eye shows distortion. How do I call these? Distortion features. These same features are just exaggerated and done over the top and multiplied, and they go stronger for fisheye lens or for 360-degree GoPro lenses. It's the same thing. It's just, done more. So if you go back, you end up at the space that has no distortion, and we don't have a lens like this, but we can in 3D programs change the camera settings and make it look like there's no distortion. And still, the principle or the idea is basically the same. Curved space is curved form. It's just a matter of perspective. Or there's a good one. So the difference basically being when you have your object aligned on a normal plane, right? And you would have basically, easy example is just boxes standing away like this. This is your space. Now, if you have curved space, due to distortion of your lens, these points are still the same points. But again, space doesn't radiate from a point that you call vanishing point, where you say, okay, all these lines lead towards it, right? But you have a middle point where the curvature is part of a radius, and the radius has a center point, and all space radiates from the center point. And this is why I love this. So you would have curvature in one axis, but you would also have the curvature in the secondary axis, right? And this ultimately, if you have your objects basically based on a sort of grid that you can manipulate in terms of having it be round as opposed to being straight, you can basically build, like Bitmonkey said, you can build your fisheye as easy because you understand the warpage, right? It's like what I'm getting at is basically these distances, like the perception of the distance between A and B when the stuff stands into space, like forward into space. This is where basically the warpage has to change the perspective. So you see the plane a certain amount, and the curvature of the plane itself would lead to you seeing less of the plane. And this is because of the curvature. And it's basically the same idea as rotation, right? It's the same thing. I can have a middle point and draw basically like I have a point and I can rotate this arrow around this point, right? But this is in 2 dimensions. This is 2-dimensional rotation, right? If I have a ring and ultimately it's an ellipse, you understand there is foreshortening in place. So the line that goes to the side is more at a full length than the line going like this, because look, the space of the line is the same, but foreshortening is in play. So when I take the line and I rotate this one around the point, it is still 2-dimensional rotation, as opposed to 3D rotation, where the line remains inside the circular shape. And this is, again, is the clock hand. 12, 6, 3, 9, etc. And there's your clock hand. The clock handle is the arrow. But it is the same, right? So the idea basically being flat thing, this goes this way, this goes this way. If this is curved, if this has a different angle, right? You have 90 degrees, 90 degrees. This goes this way, again, different angles. So this goes around. You would have to follow the curvature step by step by step by step, and bend your space. It does happen in both axes. So you have your basic space plane, and this is the curve, right? This is the curve. And usually this would be your axis, right? So there is a axis. Axis, I know this from animating 3D stuff, bones, there is a up vector. So when you have a bone structure for arms, you have to tell these arms where it's up. And this is basically the direction in which they would fold around the elbow. So that the bone can always maintain basically the right angle and the right direction of bending and folding when you are moving your arm around and doing whatever kung fu and stuff you animate with your figurines. So between points I have a line, this becomes my axis, and from this axis I have curvature. Curvature goes in a 90-degree basically radius. This is very similar to the box, but in this case the box is round, but it follows the 90 degrees basically. This is so much weirdness and confusion. So anyway, you have round space, round form, same stuff, curves, lines, stuff, things, changes. Oh my goodness. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? There is a lot of like looking at the stuff that I covered with the perspective, and it basically branches into form, but it is a short stop to this. Because legs and arms and bones, it's all stuff that is in space. You can rotate this, you can move it, you can transition it between points in space. Your visual field goes up and down. You can choose to distort, which just means it goes bigger if it's closer to your face. If it's smaller, it has to go back into space. That is all you gotta play with. And then if you go completely mad, you suddenly draw very dynamic forms and legs and stuff and things, and you draw perspective grids over your form, which is it is the total madness. It is total madness. But basically, there is a transition between the visual field, between the point of the heel and the forehead. And basically there are planes that show you the transition. It's very logical. And that is the position, the opposite of what I had before, and I'm trying to find it, the infinite space. Infinity space. Where the box goes up, but there is no change. This one, right? This is the heels, this is the forehead. Between is me. If above, I see bottom plane logic. If to my side, I see side plane logic. Right? If below to my side, I don't see bottom plane logic. In between, again, I have the transition. The transition is usually not visualized, but it is right between this. And then it is right between this. And if I follow the logic that I have a plane made from lines, I can visualize the surface of the plane by using lines and this attaching. So again, to visualize the dynamic change, this is fun stuff, because all I really got to do is visualize the change between this angle and this angle, and then this angle and this angle. Technically, this one's weird because it's weird, just weird. But this is all there is. This is literally all there is. So what if it goes down and then comes back? But since it is below my eye, I would have to see it, right? So what happens in between? And again, this is weird, because it comes from basically, it completely fuses between my eyes, and I can't see it, and then it comes back, and then it goes away again, and then it's flat, and maybe it goes around my face. So again, it goes forward to my side, it shows the radius of the curve. And this is where, after this barrier, horizontal barrier, this arrow going up, right? It doesn't go down, so it goes up. It actually goes around into space, because I have a ring that is an ellipse, right? And this is where my face exists. And I see the skirt vanish. So between this one, horizontal barrier, 45 degrees, forward into space, not down, forward. Difference being, down is this, forward goes bigger and is this. And these overlap, therefore confusing. So this plane goes down, this plane goes forward because visual marker, this being small, this being big. Logic, love it. This going down, no change, right? This being bigger, therefore forward. This being smaller, therefore down. And I'm already doing the dynamic thing because this is experimenting with angles. Are lines parallel? Yes. No change. This is a wall because it is flat. If it goes down, it goes smaller. If it comes forward, it has to go bigger. This is all there is. Bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller. So then we go sideways. Because why not? Right? And the vanishing point would shift between the sides. Right? It goes a completely different way. So again, sideways. This is where things would go weird because I can go down this way, I can go forward this way, and this again, I'm folding the forms to show the transition. And this is the beginning of curved linear perspective, because you go from you see a lot, you see less, to you see nothing at all, to then being a monoplane, but it comes back on the other side. Logic, right? And from this change, I can say there is distortion in place, so there is a vanishing point, but I can again build the flip-flop and let it come back on the other side just as easy. And this is the curved linear stuff, right? Left, right, in between. Left, right, in between. And it's the same change, right? Left, right, in between. And it's not there yet. But this angle becomes this angle, becomes this plane, becomes a different angle. So the difference in angles, right? When you follow the plane from existing to existing less, to not existing at all, to existing on the other side, to existing more on the other side, right? If you lead all these lines towards a single point, what do you have? Oh no, da boom. Again, perspective, space, form. Is it curved? Is it linear? Does it actually bend? Or is it just the arrangement of your stuff? Because you can have boxes like this. But you can also have boxes like this. It's the same principle as if space is bent or warped. Bent, warped, same. Because if you look at the arrangement of boxes in a different lens, the spatial radius plane line axis would warp. And we covered this before in this thing. We did this. Are you seeing perspective? What is perspective? Perspective doesn't exist as a single thing. It doesn't. Like I can't really see a perspective as something else. I need context, I guess. Perspective is, it has to be visible. It has to be visualized. I can't say that. I can't pretend. Find more space. I can pretend this point is in perspective. It is seen from a certain point of view within 3D space. There is no relation to anything. It is just a point. So perspective is this point. It's so confusing. It's so confusing. So dimension as dimension elements. Dimensional elements. Points are dimensional elements. Here's why. If there is a dimension, this is 1, this is 2, and this is your plane. This plane now exists in space, but it is seen from a certain point of view, from a certain angle of observation. And that equals what I understand as perspective. I can identify me being in a certain point of the space looking at this thing. Like me sitting on my chair looking at my screen from a certain point of view. I'm seeing this plane from a certain angle. That is perspective. If I scale back, and this is where things again get weird, any and all of these lines carry perspective information. Any of these points kinda does not. So if I go back, right, this box, or basically the plane equals box, this line still equals 3D information. I can say lines are a dimensional element of perspective, if that makes sense. Because the line itself, and through my conditioning, is always seen in perspective. All I have to do is take the line and do what is necessary to help my brain identify the perspective the line is seen in. And there are many, because the line itself follows a certain direction. And I talked about this earlier. There's a different plane, but it is the same line. And this again is a weird concept. And usually, if you contemplate drawing grids, if anybody would think about drawing grids to just draw a box, you're already lost. Because it is such an undertaking. And I'd rather have you go mad, but master the box, than just analyze grids, because they are futile and dumb. Holy shit, I said. Like, considering the amount of madness and weird science that I did to understand this in a very simple, I don't know, you know? But there is so much, I don't know. Why does the human want to know stuff? Why do we want to know stuff? Why do we want to understand stuff? Why do we want to get better at things? Why do we have this seemingly like innate desire to not just dwell? Like evolutionary, biological, it's in our genes, it's in our whatever atoms, right? The compelling driving force between not knowing and knowing. And I'm like, it's bad to look at it this way, but not being smart, you would feel dumb. Feeling dumb is negative, right? There is this connotation of something being good or something being bad or something being more worth and something being better than something else. For myself, I know this to be true, at least to some extent, because I know how I feel when I suck at drawing, right? And I value understanding and knowledge and this kind of stuff more than anything. Like, I'm the mad scientist because I value the time spent on understanding stupid boxes, right? Understanding transitions of space, because ultimately all of this analysis that I just talked about, I did over like 7 years, right? Like every day. I would try to analyze and understand and compute to just be able to ultimately, like, where it goes. I just had it, like these legs, like the form and the space and the transition and the planes and the curvature. Holy poop, my brain loves this, right? This is like the peak, of the mountain that I want to climb, and I'm still not there. But for me, in my artistic nature, for my artistic soul, for my brain, for whatever I am, there is a value in knowing how this works. So that I can, just like language, there is a value in knowing how to speak and how to write, right? Like write language, communicate. There is a value in this kind of self-expression. And all of this, there's so much madness that I just came about having to do and needing to do because somewhere deep down in my intuition, I knew like I want more, and I want this, so I have to learn this. And then, like, I basically had plenty of encounters with my frustration because I wanted to do things that I couldn't, right? Like, gotta show the classic image, right? Like, I was, I wanted it so bad, right? I was screaming internally, like I could do this, right? But I wanted to do this, right? Like, and not just once, but more legs and more legs and more space and more form. And this, like this being structural analysis, right? This is structure. This is all structure, raw form analysis. And I had no idea, but I wanted it. I wanted it so bad. Who's your me? There's me. There's myself, I suppose. Mentors. Well, who are those guys? What is a mentor? Oh no. I wish. Like, actually, I wish. I can't. There's, like, there's myself. There's only myself. Like, if I try to figure this out, right? If I really look back into stuff and things, right? Like, if I analyze the science that I know, there are very few instances where I would say I picked this up from something or somebody, right? Because many things that I discovered, yes, people talk about this. Like, there are many people that know things and form and contour lines and section lines, and there's one source that I can name. I forgot his name, but there is one. Remind me, form lines. But through my ruthless and rigorous and scientific analysis, like looking at single lines, right? Like looking at just one line, and one line has meaning, and looking at all these kind of things and stuff, and basically doing the science and the the art of analysis, basically. I came about all of these things more or less naturally, more or less, because they were the missing pieces to um, to help me do what I want to do, right? So let's say I wanted to do this kind of stuff, right? Like the format space, right? But I couldn't, so I could only do this. But analyzing this to the degree that this was possible, this is basically the the journey. And there was nobody really, um, and I suppose I am thick-headed when it comes to this kind of stuff because in my intuition, right, there is a part that is completely convinced I know what to do. And even in a time like this, I knew what to do. Right? There was struggle, yes, but in my intuition, right, there was always some kind of direction where my brain says, do this, and it's gonna work out. Right? There was no real desire or need to look for outside sources. And yes, there was always reference. Like, don't get me wrong, right? Reference always there, but there is no reference that says this is what you have and this is what you should do, right? In terms of like clarity and structure and doing the form stuff. This is very much skillful. This is not. This is guesswork. This is me learning, trying to figure things out. That's a long answer. And I wish, like, it'd be great to say, go look up this guy, go look up this book, right? But it's weird. And for the specific kind of stuff that I had to do and I wanted to know the way I wanted to know it, um, to like please my brain, right? To get the sense of me understanding stuff, right? I couldn't listen, like listening to somebody else talk about stuff. I still have to do my own analysis. That is, it's so weird. It's so weird. As for one thing, there was it was a tutorial, like drawing joints, and these robotic. How do you call these? Not joints, not ankles. Yes, joints, like these things. So I had a tutorial. There was a couple of instructional videos about doing this kind of stuff, like form lines and form grids. Basically, you have a normal shape, and you basically just do this to visualize the surface, right? So I picked it up from this tutorial specifically, and still, I was already on the road doing this kind of stuff anyway, you know. As for like the real core piece part of the geometry is basically you have a form, and every form has planes, and these are the planes that are fronts and sides and bottoms and tops. And depending on lighting or positioning or form geometry structure, you have different kind of values or different kind of angles for the hatching. This is how you go from, or this is how I go from any single two-dimensional shape to basically understanding all this works. So in the structure, you have horizontal lines, vertical lines. Some of these are contours, the other ones are sections. Section lines basically the ones that go along the form. Contour lines, across. The other ones go along, but vice versa. Both works, right? And instead of having a rather random structure, I already contemplate the plane that is in front of me, because the curvature of the form is important, and this is not visible when I have these 3 points. And I say between these points is depth. And this again is not something anybody told me. Like, who would have told me to analyze points in space, to like figure out form lines and form space and all this kind of stuff? Like, why would I have listened to this guy if he wasn't able to specifically guide me to what I wanted to do? And it brings me back to one reason why I can't really recommend books or outside sources, because the issues that we have are more or less very specific. I suppose it's not really good to say don't use books, because I can't be there to help you. But this is kind of what I'm saying, right? If I had the best way, I would be your guide, right? You could ask me questions, and I would compute the right answer that is suited to you and your issues, and not a generalized almanac and collimation of knowledge of perspective that 10 people already did years before, right? How many books of perspective are there? Like at least 10, right? There's no reason for me to make another one unless it's different, kappa, if not better, right? And this again brings me back to the sciences. It's just how it is, you know. It's weird. It's weird being in this position. That's all I can really say. It's weird. It's weird. Self-discovery to please own brain, possibly yes, but there's a part in my brain or in my mind that knows when it knows, and it can't fake it, right? I can't pretend. My ego can say right now, I got it. I know what I want to do, but I don't. So I will try to do what I want to do and fail. And this is where the evidence is basically self-evident, and I know I'm lying to myself. Therefore, I listen to this part of my brain. mind. So the self-discovery is basically a part of how do you call this? It is a very weird kind of idea, because the only way to know when you're ready is when you know, right? And this is something your mind has to connect with. Otherwise, your mind would connect to what it already connects, which is driven by something else. And this again brings me back to me just pretending I got it. It's like my ego faking it, and it's usually we can't really take this apart much, right? Because our mind, my mind, would have little ability to know when it's done, right? It's like saying, this is 100%. This is all I need. My mind doesn't have this. It has a certain amount, right? X%. And it can't pretend it is 100, but it may not, you know? So it's kind of hard to tell. But otherwise, it's weird. And I know I don't have it, because there are certain things for form and space and hatching and angle change and transition that I know I don't have. And that it limits my sense for the 100%. So I know I don't have it. Maybe I have 79%. And that is a lot. That is a lot. It's like a blind spot. And I'm very careful with this assessment. Layer numbering causing deep insecurities. Yeah, I don't number my layers. Yes, well, I do, but I don't. It's by default. I should take a break and just drink. Holy shit! I was talking 2 hours. Oh my goodness. How you increase attention span for long duration studies? Slowly. Slowly, very slowly. The idea, I start talking again. There is a mindfulness. There is a mindfulness involved, and there is a conflict. And I shall present to you the diagram that makes it all easier to understand. And it's the wrong way. This one. So there's the yin and yang, right? So you have basically the you, and you have the other you. So one of them wants to be attentive and have attention span and be disciplined. The other you doesn't really want to do this. And I would say there is a you and there is the ego. And they're both you, right? So there is a one, but there is one that is two. And the one exists in the other. This is the idea, right? You have one in the other, just like you have good and bad and good, but this is a different kind of way. So, like something when I read the question, the first thing that just jumped into my brain was it is an active partake. It is not something that just happens, right? So what happens though is that some part of you wants to stop. It doesn't want to have an increased attention span. And that means it says, stop doing what you're doing and do something else. Right? And it is either one of those that says it. And this is something you would notice. Usually we realize when we are not pleased and we are unsatisfied and we are stressed, and we just, like me right now, I could just shut up and go play video games. So there is like, from my own experience, I have to be very active and very mindful and talk to myself. Not active like verbally, but when my brain says go play video games, I have to sit there, observe the thoughts that says stop, and tell my brain to shut the fuck up. because I have a desire. I have a desire and wish. I have a desire and dream of discipline and attention span. And this is where me, myself, and I and ego have to be me, myself, and I. And it's the same thing, right? There is one thing that says stop when the other thing says do more. And this is the only way, really. So how do you increase attention span? Have attention. Pay attention. Be attentive. You know, like in these words alone, there should be plenty of food for thought. Because what is attention? What is focus? And that too is part of the how do I have attention span? But paying attention to attention. Right? It's such a weird thing. And some part of you has to do this. Focus. Focus more. Otherwise, it can't happen. Because without the one, you can't have the other. And this is like, what is attention? How do I tell myself to pay more attention to myself as opposed to paying attention to myself? Right? Like the one part of me says, I want to do something else, 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 I want to do something else. And I have no attention. I have no time to pay attention to the things I want to pay attention to. And this is the weird conundrum. Like it is the absolute pickle. And I know the issues, and I know I have an active mind. Obviously, you can listen to me and how sometimes I just articulate myself in terms of like I try to speak 3 words. You know, and none comes out. So I suppose I'm playing into it a bit. And again, if I were to pay more attention to my own pace, to my own mind, and slow down, and again, this is where I pay attention to what I'm doing, which is wanting to pay attention. It's weird, right? And this is where I am in myself, struggling against myself. And this is, I'd rather look at this in a philosophical way than say, I gotta believe science and ADHD and these weird syndromes because my brain isn't wired properly. There's no pill, there's no vitamin that takes care of attention for you. And it starts with yourself. Like this is basically you being mindful to yourself. And it is a discipline, right? There is a part of basically you shutting yourself off in an empty room and just you and yourself, your thoughts. And basically the dark void of the abyss staring back into you. The other abyss. Oh no. It is a complete mindfuck. But I remember this is how I remember this, right? I was done with my photo university, I had my degree, was happy, and I wanted to know if I can actually draw. Like for a job. And so I thought, I don't need to earn money because I was living with my mom, so I had rent covered. But I had to figure out if I can draw 8 hours a day because that is a professional minimum. So, and at first I realized it was definitely difficult. So the idea is the training and practice because you can't expect to have the 100% just because. And usually I didn't. What am I doing? With my Photoshop. Oh no, it broke it. So it was a slow training. And more or less I started with like 1 hour drawing and I played some video games because my brain couldn't handle it. And it's basically, what I was doing is practice, study, which is strain on the mind, right? It's stress, and it was stress. So I didn't want to do it, but I knew I have to. And again, we end up with me struggling with myself because part of me didn't want to do it because it's stressful, and the other part knew it had to do more. So what am I going to do, right? So there's part of the effort reward kind of thing where you train your dog, and when the doggy does a good job, you pet your dog and you say good boy, and you give the boy a treat. You feed your dog a treat, something yummy. And we know what I do sometimes is I go on candy breaks, right? So back in the day when I was practicing, I did as much as I could, and then I took a break, and then I did more. And I took a break and I did more, and took a break and I did more. And this is a cycle, right? And eventually you realize where you have a choice. And this again, the choice does not exist if you don't pay attention to the choice. Where basically one part of my brain, one part of your brain says, I want to stop, I want to play video games, I want to go on a candy break, and right now I've streamed 2.5 hours and I could very well stop because I'm exhausted from talking too much. And again, it's my own fault for talking so much and so fast all the time, constantly, yep, yep, yep. So, but the choice is basically doing a little bit more. Even if it's just 10 minutes, start low. 10 minutes is fine. And then over time, it's 10 minutes more and it's 20 minutes more. And when you're done the half hour, you take a break. Maybe a shorter break. It doesn't matter. Take a normal break. But still, you do more again, right? Where first you did 1 hour drawing and then you do 2 hours another day. And then you want to extend it slowly over time, right? Because, again, I remind myself how important it is to me. Because if my brain doesn't find a reason to do it, it doesn't do it. And we all know this, right? Like doing laundry, going shopping for things we don't really want to shopping for, right? We put them on a list and say, we do it next week. And for me, drawing was a very important thing. And there was little that took attention away. Like eventually, like once I realized how important it is, right? I crumpled up my entire life pretty much, right? Like again, it's weird saying you make sacrifices, but there is a sacrifice eventually because I can play video games all day. I did this yesterday. It was good. And I may do it tomorrow because like I need the downtime. My brain needs to not think about this fucking science drawing madness, and it is mind boggling, right? Like it is exhausting. It can be exhausting. And still I was able to draw 16 hours a day eventually after time and practice, after I disciplined myself. And I knew that doing these practices, doing this practice and training and stuff will make you better. And then again, the logic is basically, okay, if I practice 1 hour every day, I gain 2% skill level. I can have 1,570 more XP points if you want to stay within the video games, right? It's fun. And if I do 2 hours and I get the XP bonus and I eat some more candy, I get more XP bonus, so I get 5 levels extra. You know, this is the idea. And I know why I practice so goddamn fucking much. Excuse the language. But it is where, like, I go into berserk mode. Because for my own aesthetic freedom sense, there is a tiny goblin that goes into this beast mode because it knows if I do this, there is no between. But the next time you stop, you are basically skilled, you are good, you are satisfied, you are happy, you are a master at your own craft, right? You have uncovered the discoveries, you have all the treasures that you ever wanted because you stuck with it. And basically staying stuck with it is basically you stuck with you and your focus and your attention and your discipline and your dreams and your desires, right? There's that. And still, it doesn't just go from, from 0 to 100, right? Not everybody is the prodigy that says, I am 9 years old and I want to be the pianist. I want to be the music composer. Some people are this, right? Not everybody is 12 years old and has a science PhD. I'm not, but there are some very smart, prodigy, genius level kind of people, young people that just, they know what they want to do and there's no other questions, so they don't really pay attention to anything else and they don't ask the question, but there is a drive and a kind of focus and all this kind of stuff. But I remember it was a slow training. That's just it. Like, it was a very slow training to pay more attention to me learning and me improving and getting closer to my dream, right? It's like being an artist or being good at drawing weird stuff, right? Like people with 10 legs, this. Like, when I was doing this, I am more than pleased because the skill and the accumulation of time and effort and all the sweat and blood and all this kind of stuff. Like, it finally comes together to something where my brain, it just, it's easy after 10 years of it not being easy. And I'm going away from the original question, but focus, discipline, and all this stuff is slowly trained. And eventually, this is where you sit yourself down in silence, right? Go outside, get into a room, no parents, no siblings, no nothing. Just you. No phone, no beeps, no alerts, no Twitter, no messages, just you, nature, your pillows, your blankets, your little tiny fortress in the closet. They're very awesome, by the way. Um, where you can be in peace, right? For just a moment and contemplate, focus, and attention. And this is something where I still work on, where it basically has to settle in yourself, right? Otherwise, it's like this weird octopus or this weird tentacle thing, monster beast that just wants to grab and suck all these things that I talked about earlier, like playing video games, seeing your friends, getting drunk, having sex, meeting girlfriends, going on a date, doing stuff, wearing masks because Corona, and all this kind of stuff. But there is still the choice between putting it putting it away for at least an hour and doing more what you want to do, even if it's just contemplating attention and focus, so that you have more the next day and more the next day. You know, and still, it is the active part. It is active, and the mind likes to run on its own with basically you being you. And that means for me being myself, I have to do all these things. Otherwise, I don't feel like myself. So I have to check my phone right now, and I have to check my Twitter and my feed and who's on Twitch and what's up tomorrow and all this stuff. And that, like, I can observe my brain very well. But I can observe my brain or my mind and all these. It's like internal stimuli that I eventually became aware of just because paying attention. I'm so far away from the original question. Who's awake right now? Anybody sane still? Anybody sane? I'm insane. I'm unsane. I don't know. I need candy. I need drinks. Any questions? Have I answered the question? Have I answered the question? At least. Am I still making any sense? Is anything making any sense right now? Am I still talking? What is going on? Who are you? Who am I? I make tea. Am I back? I don't know things anymore. It's like I'm drunk, but I'm back. Anybody still alive? What's up, Junkers? How things? Still exhausted. Oh my god. Breathe. Breathe. Any questions? But have I answered? Yes. I suppose. Bitmonkey, did I answer the question? I suppose I did. I suppose I did. Something else you can always do is just have shorter studies. Like the study, usually when I study my things, I don't want to get distracted. So when I'm doing legs, and when I want to do legs, and I do the body, and then I do arms, this is where my brain definitely feels like the strain because I'm going too far out of my way when I just when brain wants to do legs, it just sometimes just wants to do legs. So I do short studies, small studies. How am I? I am confused. Confused and exhausted. So much talking. Just. Can I make Wookiee noises? Oh my goodness. That's exhausting. Any questions? Any other questions? So my brain had an idea, just wanted to go back to the mentor resource kind of thing. And I suppose, like again, it seems so very specific, right? Like I can still tell you so many different sources of books or video tutorials and just say go YouTube and you find much, right? You find much things that are they are valuable, they are viable, they are very helpful, they are precise, they're accurate, and they're all the good stuff, right? Like normal color theory, design, shape language, form, value, perspective. You have a great bunch of sources and resources and mentor people that know that stuff. So my issue or my kind of hook where things tear apart is the specificness, like you having a specific issue with X or Y or Z, right? Like perspective or a certain body or body part or color. I have these specific issues, right? So and that like the weirdness is one example for weird stuff. I have a red couch and I have green light. What happens to the red color of the couch when it is hit by green light? And there is no book that I can talk to that would have this specific answer. And usually is it's just weird that my brain thinks this way. And I am colorblind, but it's just it seems specific, you know. So same thing with asking for tips. It is very specific. Right? It's not specific enough. So specific questions generate specific answers. You know, specific resources, like resources that I would actually put on my list, have to have a certain curriculum or chapters, or certain things that have to be covered to a certain extent, right? And I suppose one example is Michael Hampton's book, Figure Drawing and Anatomy. And I'm trying to find it in my bookshelf and I can't see it, but it's somewhere. So that is a book. It is very good for anatomy. I could and would recommend it for anatomy if you ever need a quick overview, right? Just look at a book, find the page, and that is, right? It's like the muscles are separated. You have illustrative drawings, you have technical drawings. You can identify the different muscles. It shows you the names of the muscles, etc., etc. So going back to the form part, like where the muscle or the body is a three-dimensional form, the part when it comes to understanding the form in Michael Hampton's book is 4 pages where 2 are filled with pictures. So you have less text, and that is less info, which is less knowledge. So it is lacking. So you can see, but it is a normal kind of ratio when it comes to you have books, extensive books about anatomy. Anatomy for my brain is already form. And my brain is like, how do I visualize this? Learning anatomy, right, does not help me visualizing, drawing form and space, or form in space. So this is, again, is where my brain is not compatible with. I'm trying to find the book. Where is it? Where did I put? Where you go? It's somewhere. I will Google the title. Um, Figure Drawing Design and Invention by Michael. This one. The other one is, I will give you long Google link. This one. Oh fuck. I can't 500 link. I think. Does it work? Why does it say reached character limit of 500? Why do you tell me this? So this is what you should see. Borna Hogarth, Drawing Anatomy. His books. This is specifically like these drawings. They go nuts in my brain, right? And I hope I'm not seeing any penises. But this is like, as a kid, I ate this up because this is awesome. This is volume. This is dynamic. This is wow, you know? And this is why I used it, you know? And I didn't use Loomis because, nah. You know, so there's the issue with the style choice, so the choice of style choice. And I'd still, I don't mind Michael Henton's book because it is it gives a good overview, right? If I want to look at a specific muscle and I don't want to, like the Bernard Hogarth book that I have of him is like 4 kilograms. It is huge. It has like 300 pages plus. It is actually heavy, huge. It's probably 7 kilograms. So I just grabbed the Michael Henton book. So anyway, the difference being with the 2 pages of the form, right? In Michael Henton's book, at least he covers this, right? And this still, for my needs, or for what I wanted, or for what I needed, it was not available at the time, right? Like YouTube wasn't a thing when I wanted to learn how to draw, you know. So like we had to go to libraries. Holy shit, dial-up internet and that kind of stuff. You know, it was insane, actually. You know, it was pretty bare bones, and everything else was like schooling and tutoring. Like imagine schools for artists 20 years ago. Like I wouldn't want to go there. They didn't have computers and digital painting and stuff. Holy shit. Imagine. Imagine. So learning different things is different resources. There's like I remember having different painting tutorials from Gnomon School back in the day. And they were the thing of the things. They were like the pinnacle of pinnacles of digital art entertainment industry education. Like it was amazing, right? And you had Feng Zhu and all the good stuff. You had Scott Robertson. I suppose I could, if there is a resource, Scott Robertson is good, but I should warn you. I would definitely warn you for the extensive use of grids and for the lack of elaborating on dynamic space. So we have. I'm a draw ladder. I'm drawing a ladder, right? A ladder is a tool. Let's see if I can draw a crutch. How do crutches look? Like this, and there's a handpiece, and then you have the thing. This is also a tool, and it helps. But since you ignore your own legs, a ladder would be better. And so my visual contemplations of using perspective grids to a huge extent is basically the vice, where you are in between and you are eternally stuck because you don't know how to form in space without grids. I could describe perspective as I can't draw a vice. Holy shit, there is a thingy in the thing, and you have a handle for turning the thing. Yeah. I don't draw these things usually, only pose the boxes. So, similar to reference. If you rely on reference too much, it is a vice, and you're stuck and you're squeezed. Otherwise, it is a crutch. But usually, you want to look for the ladder, in a way. Scott Robertson, however, has a very good video series, or had a video series about shading. And this is where he has simple examples of form boxes, round curved form boxes and similar things. And he explains a kind of logical computation to visualize the form and not just like visualize the form as a standalone and not always rely on light. It doesn't really make sense, but he has a number kind of system, right? And this is where it was kind of too much for me. But having a number system makes sense if you have a normal grid. And this is where you have geometry. It comes directly into play. You have a light source lighting a certain portion of the grid with 90% of intensity. And every part, every step of the way, the value would lose intensity. And this is where you basically go from a white to a dark, right? From 100% intensity to 0% intensity. In between, we call this the gradient. It's a bad gradient. Gotta go more black and more light, etc., until I have the background color, and this is where I have to basically go reverse to complete the gradient. So having this some kind of arbitrary understanding of how to separate things, I do the same, right? I don't use dark and bright, but I use angles. This is straight angles. We call these horizontal, vertical, and this is where the madness begins, because I know I have a front plane. Front plane is a different angle than the side planes. And usually the form is this, but sometimes the form is a cylinder, so it's something else. So to separate this one from this one, from this one to this one, I can't have the same angle. And this is where I have between these points, I have different angles. As easy as this. And then I take this angle and I run it to the top. And something happens to these angles. So they change because the surface changes. So it's like the muscles of the leg, they kind of twirl and twist and swirl and they do things. So the structure of a cylinder is linear. It goes from up to down, and this is all it does. It does go across, but usually I don't confuse myself, so I keep a more linear structure. For anatomy, it doesn't really follow the grid, right? Because there are anatomical elements such as the belly, there's stuff like this, there's a bone, there's muscles, there's tendons and things and strings and stuff and things. So the structure kind of seems to have a more dynamic appeal as things kind of seem to twist or move in certain directions. So the structure is definitely changing. This is where I would have a specific angle for the side plane, a different angle for the front, and a different angle for the other sides. This is what I would have. So the basic simplification is of a cylindrical volume, at least half of this one, right? This is what you can see. It is 3 planes. Not to be mistaken with the 3-point perspective, still I forget to drink. Tea still hot. So for the anatomy, and this is anatomy helps, right? To know there is a muscle that goes from this point to this point. There's more things that go from this point and this point. There's the thigh that kind of is like a hanging bag. It's a very awkward kind of thing. There's the crotch and it goes up, and then there's the panties, and there's weird things from the leg, and there's more muscles that I can't even pronounce. But they have a direction, right? They go from one point to the next. And this is when I think about the cylinder and I have a nonlinear structure. So the one plane begins and then it cuts over. And the one plane that does begin actually wraps around the cylinder. It doesn't just stop technically. So the entire plane twists itself around the cylinder. Where it did used to kind of originate from this angle, you can observe in between how it changes step by step by step. And eventually you have the barrier of horizontal. This is where things go flippity flip. And you always have a point where it flips. And this is usually when you have even a normal 1-point perspective plane. This is like the whole magic. And it's such a weird, obvious magical treasure. It's just mind-boggling. Because between this one and this one, I have a surface of a plane, right? So the plane or the surface can be filled. And what happens in between but a transition from point A to point B. And the logic is that if I have this angle and I want it to become this angle or any other angle, I eventually come by the barrier of horizontal or vertical. And this only if I visualize the transition, right? Right, I love this. I love this so much. So if I keep this up even, I come to the next barrier. And this again is very indicative of a radius circle space form because there's my barriers, and this being the 12, this being the 6, the 3, the 9, and I have my fantastic boxes pointing in space in different directions, all coming from the middle point. Where was I? So, lines, angles, plane, hatching. But this is the basic idea is cylindrical volume, linear structure is altered to where it is non-linear, right? And there is still planes that have to be obeyed to make it look like the entire weird structure of this leg is facing a certain way, as if it is standing in a clock space. This being the 12, there's a what have we, an H and a P, right? So when we stand like her or like this one, like the leg, the no mono entity creature, usually the leg should come forward straight. But I can't pretend the leg would go sideways, it can go this way. As long as I draw the foot in the right direction, I can pretend it is a foot. It is not a foot. But I can't pretend it goes this way. So for the other part, and I'm seeing this, these two lines build a plane, and I'm using this angle for my 90 degrees to pretend the leg is actually pointing this way. So this is the angle, and it goes, has to twist because it curves, and then it has to twist because it curves the other way, and this is where it goes around the leg. So it still twists, and then it's gone. Oh, it's gone. The entire plane is basically bending around the thing, and it's gone. If that makes sense. So it's still a plane, right? And it's gone. So it follows the line. And then there is a different plane adjacent. So between this, there's still structure, right? The structure of the waist. How do you call this?